Come in. Close the door behind you. It's raining out, and this particular story has been waiting a long time to be properly read. Hello, and welcome. I'm Mith, and this is the History Sanctuary. Pull up a chair and get comfortable, whether you're settling in to learn something new, filling the background while you work or study, or simply letting the past carry you gently off to sleep. You are exactly where you need to be. This is a place where history is told quietly, carefully, the way it deserves to be told, not as a list of dates to memorize, but as the story of real people in real places doing remarkable things. Most of the world has long since forgotten. Everything you hear comes from real research, real discoveries, real scholars, and this is a real voice. I'm not generated, not synthetic, just me sitting in my little library, turning pages by the firelight and sharing what I find. If you're planning to drift off to sleep tonight, do yourself and me a favor and like, follow, and leave a comment before you close your eyes. The algorithm won't wake you up to remind you, but I'd love to have you back. For everyone else, welcome to the archive. The kettle's on, the rain isn't stopping anytime soon, and we have so much to talk about. I want to tell you about someone, a whole people actually, people who lived, loved, mourned, decorated themselves, and cared for one another long before anyone thought to write any of it down. People who, for most of modern history, we got entirely, embarrassingly wrong. Tonight, we're opening the file on the Neanderthals. The Neanderthal, Homo neanderthalensis, was an extinct species of archaic humans that lived in Eurasia until about 40,000 years ago. In 1856, workers in Germany's Neander Valley unearthed a skull cap and scattered bones that defied expectations. The remains were clearly human-like, yet strikingly different from anything researchers had seen before. This discovery, named for that valley, became a turning point in our understanding of human origins. They were not, as we once imagined, confined to a single European cave. Neanderthals ranged widely across what is now Europe, the Middle East, and deep into Central Asia. Their bones have been found in the mountains of Iraq, the coasts of Gibraltar, the river valleys of France and Germany, and the caves of Uzbekistan. A young Neanderthal found in a cave in Uzbekistan challenged long-held views about the range of Neanderthal habitation, revealing that they had adapted and thrived in Central Asia's diverse environments. They were here, in many places, for a very long time, roughly 400,000 years. To put that into perspective, our own civilization, from the earliest writing to now, is perhaps only 6,000 years old. So where did the caveman image come from? When those first bones were found in 1856, the world was barely beginning to understand evolution. The remains were interpreted through a lens of hierarchy. the assumption that humans had marched in a straight line from primitive to civilized, and that anyone who looked different must be lesser. Early reconstructions depicted Neanderthals as stooped, knuckle-dragging brutes, more ape than human, and that image seeped into the popular imagination, into cartoons, into films, into the word Neanderthal being used as an insult. It stuck for well over a century. But the bones told a different story. We just weren't listening yet. Before I can tell you the story of Neanderthals, we need to go back even further, much further. Because the Neanderthals didn't simply appear in Europe one day. They arrived there the way that all living things arrive, slowly across vast stretches of time, shaped by the world around them. The story begins in Africa. Around 2 million years ago, an early human ancestor, Homo erectus, became the first of our broad family to walk out of Africa and into the rest of the world. They spread across Asia, into Europe and beyond, adapting as they went. For a very long time, they were the most widely traveled humans on Earth. But Homo erectus is not where the Neanderthal story ends. It's only where it begins. One of those migrations that followed produced Homo heidelbergensis, who lived around 500,000 years ago and is considered the likely ancestor of both Neanderthals and, separately, of us, of Homo sapiens. Think of Homo heidelbergensis as a fork in the road. One branch of that population stayed in Africa and eventually, over hundreds of thousands of years, became modern humans. The other branch had already moved into Europe and Western Asia, and it was that population, shaped by the cold, the ice, the long dark winters of a glacial world, that gradually became the Neanderthals. Comparison of Neanderthal and modern human DNA suggests that the two lineages diverged from their common ancestor sometime between 350 and 400,000 years ago, with the European branch leading to the Neanderthals and the African branch to us. So we didn't descend from Neanderthals. We are more like cousins who came from the same grandparents and then went very different directions and then didn't see each other again for a very, very long time. Typical Neanderthal features begin appearing in the European fossil record near the beginning of the Middle Pleistocene, in specimens usually classified as Homo heidelbergensis. These pre-Neanderthals gradually accumulated their distinctive traits as populations adapted to cold environments, evolving what researchers call a hyperarctic physique. Their bodies became stocky and compact, built to hold heat. Their noses grew broad to warm the frozen air before it reached their lungs. Their brow ridges thickened, their skulls elongated. Generation by generation, they became the Neanderthals we recognize. It took perhaps 200,000 years of slow, quiet change. There was no single moment of becoming, just time and cold and survival. And here is one more extraordinary wrinkle that science has only recently uncovered. We tend to think of this as a one-way story, humans leaving Africa, encountering Neanderthals, and the story flowing in a single direction. But the DNA says otherwise. A study led by researchers at the University of Pennsylvania found that Neanderthals were already carrying human DNA long before modern humans migrated out of Africa en masse, because an ancient lineage of modern humans had migrated into Eurasia around 250,000 years ago and interbred with Neanderthals there. As a result, approximately 6% of the Neanderthal genome was inherited from those early modern humans. The relationship between our two peoples was not a single brief encounter. Princeton researchers mapping gene flow between the groups identified a first wave of contact around 200,000 to 250,000 years ago, another wave around 100,000 to 120,000 years ago, and the largest and most significant one around 50 to 60,000 years ago. For roughly 200,000 years, our two kinds of people were meeting, parting, and meeting again across mountains and rivers and ice sheets in ways we are only now beginning to read in the traces left in our own blood. They were never strangers. They were family, estranged by distance and time, finding each other again and again across the long darkness of the Pleistocene. And now you know where they came from. High in the Zagros Mountains of what is now northern Iraq, there is a cave called Shanidar. In the 1950s and 60s, an archaeologist excavated it and found the remains of at least 10 Neanderthal individuals. But one of them, known simply as Shanidar 1, stopped researchers in their tracks. Shanidar 1 survived for at least a decade despite a withered arm, a damaged leg, probable blindness in one eye, and probable hearing loss. Researchers concluded this was only possible through what was likely daily care and provisioning from the others. Think about what that means. This individual could not hunt, could not easily forage, could not fully defend themselves. By any cold calculation of survival, they should not have lived, and yet they did, for years. Research noted that a one-armed, partially blind, crippled man could have made no pretense of hunting or gathering his own food. That he survived for years after his trauma was a testament to Neanderthal compassion and humanity. Shanidar 1 was not an exception, though. Researchers investigated the skeletal remains of more than 30 individuals where minor and serious injuries were evident, but did not lead to loss of life, displaying several episodes of injury and recovery, suggesting that Neanderthals must have had a well-developed system of care in order to survive. A 2018 University of York study found that in some cases, injuries occurred long before death and would have required monitoring, massage, fever management, and hygiene care. But perhaps what surprises people most is this: they made things, beautiful things, meaningful things. In Gibraltar, a Neanderthal engraved a hashtag-like symbol in the bedrock of a cave. In Croatia, Neanderthals harvested eagle talons and made them into necklaces. At sites in Gibraltar and Italy, they hunted birds for their feathers, perhaps to wear as ceremonial headdresses and capes. In Spain, they made shell jewelry and mixed sparkly paint that they may have used as a kind of cosmetic. At least 23 raptor talons, mostly from white-tailed eagles, have been found at 10 Neanderthal sites, ranging in age from 130,000 to 42,000 years ago. The talons carry cut marks, and researchers found what may be remnants of leather cord on one talon in Croatia, suggesting it was worn as a bracelet or a necklace. Consider that someone 130,000 years ago looked at an eagle and thought, I want to carry a piece of that with me. And then, in 2018, something remarkable was confirmed. Using uranium-thorium dating on carbonite crusts in 3 Spanish caves, researchers showed that cave paintings there, red and black images of animals, geometric shapes, hand stencils, and handprints, were older than 64,000 years. This predates the arrival of modern humans in Europe by at least 20,000 years. The only people in Europe at that time were Neanderthals. They were painters. It remains debated. Science always debates, and that's healthy, but the evidence is striking. Here's something that I think deserves its own quiet moment. We say Neanderthals went extinct around 40,000 years ago, and technically, as a distinct population, that's true. But extinction implies that they simply ended, vanished, like a candle going out. DNA tells a different story. They didn't disappear. In a very real sense, they were absorbed, folded into us. Neanderthals contributed 1 to 4% of the genome of modern humans in Europe and Asia, and that DNA has been sitting quietly in human cells ever since, doing work, shaping immune responses, influencing how we process illness, possibly affecting hair, skin, and more. But here's where it gets even more interesting. We carry Neanderthal DNA in our nuclear genome, the DNA inherited from both parents. What we do not carry is Neanderthal mitochondrial DNA. And mitochondrial DNA is special because it passes almost exclusively through the maternal line, from mother to child, generation after generation, essentially unchanged. The absence of Neanderthal mitochondrial DNA in modern humans strongly suggests something striking, that the interbreeding between our two species flowed primarily in one direction, that it was mostly male Neanderthals and female Homo sapiens who coupled, not the reverse. The children of those pairings would have inherited their mother's mitochondrial DNA, modern human, Homo sapiens, mitochondrial DNA, and so Neanderthal maternal lineages faded out of the record entirely. Why? That's where the theories begin, and scientists are still debating it. One possibility is simple geography and circumstance. That's when Homo sapiens migrated into Neanderthal territory. It was more common for Neanderthal men to encounter and form bonds with incoming Homo sapiens women than the other way around. Another, more sobering theory involves natural selection. It's possible the children born of Neanderthal mothers and Homo sapiens fathers simply had lower survival rates, that something in the particular genetic combination was less viable. Over tens of thousands of years, those lineages would quietly disappear from the record, while the other pairings persisted. After all, the Neanderthal population never reached the numbers or level of the Homo sapiens population. Birth may have been more difficult for Neanderthal mothers to begin with, or their own body systems may not have been able to carry the hybrid babies well. In 2025, it was published that the red blood cells in Neanderthal sapiens hybrid women may not have been compatible with them carrying children. A third theory relates to group dynamics. Some researchers suggest that in the social structures of the time, it may have been the Neanderthal men who were more likely to be integrated into the Homo sapiens groups through trade, alliance, or simply wandering, while Neanderthal women remained more tightly within their own communities, which, of course, were shrinking. None of these theories are settled. The honest answer is, we don't fully know. But the question itself is extraordinary when you sit with it. Somewhere, perhaps 60,000 years ago, a Neanderthal and a Homo sapiens looked at each other across whatever boundary existed between their worlds and crossed it. And the descendants of that moment are still here, reading, listening, carrying that ancient meeting forward in their blood. The Neanderthals didn't vanish. Part of them is very much alive. The single biggest shift in how we understand Neanderthals didn't come from a bone at all. It came from a laboratory in Germany. In 2010, the geneticist Svante Pääbo and his team accomplished something that had seemed impossible. They sequenced the genome of the Neanderthal, and in doing so, they found that gene transfer that had occurred from Neanderthals to Homo sapiens following the migration out of Africa around 70,000 years ago. This ancient flow of genes affects the physiology of present-day humans, including how our immune system reacts to infections. And that's when we learn that Neanderthals contributed 1 to 4% of the genome of modern humans, in Europe and Asia. In other words, if you are of non-African descent, you almost certainly carry a small piece of Neanderthal DNA right now in your cells, in your immune system, possibly in how your hair grows or how you respond to illness. Pebo's seminal research gave rise to an entirely new scientific discipline, paleogenomics. And in 2022, the Nobel Committee in Stockholm recognized it, awarding Pebo the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. We didn't just share a planet with Neanderthals. We shared children with them. The file on Neanderthals is not closed, not even close. In 2025, a study published evidence that the first humans to deliberately make and control fire may have been Neanderthals living in England more than 400,000 years ago. With heated sediments, fire-cracked flint tools, and fragments of iron pyrite found at a site in Barnum, a mineral used to strike sparks. They didn't just use fire that they stumbled upon. They may have made it. Research also documented how Neanderthals transported the bones of animals, antelope, deer, horses, even forest elephants, to sites specifically to crush, chop, and boil them to access the nutritious fat inside. They cooked strategically and with planning. So why did we get them so wrong for so long? Partly prejudice, partly the limits of early science, partly, I think, a deep human need to feel unique, to believe that compassion, creativity, and community were inventions of our kind alone. The evidence says otherwise. The Neanderthals buried their dead. They nursed their sick. They wore eagle feathers and painted caves and held the hands of women in labor. They sat with each other by fires that they learned to make themselves in the cold dark of an Ice Age Europe for 400,000 years. They were not our inferiors. They were our cousins, and for a time, a long, tangled, intimate time, they were something even closer than that. That's our story on Neanderthals. Come back soon. There are so many more waiting on these shelves. And if you enjoyed sitting by the fire with me today, subscribe. We have a lot of history to unpack. And the kettle's always on.